What if I told you this war was decided decades before the first shot was fired? That it wasn't just about NATO, nor just about Putin's ambitions, but something far older, something buried deep in history, energy, and survival? What if I told you that Ukraine and Russia were never meant to be enemies? To understand the Russia-Ukraine war, we must rewind over 1,000 years. Ukraine wasn't always Ukraine, and Russia wasn't always Russia. In the 9th century, both were part of the same civilization, Kievan Rus, a vast and powerful Slavic state. But history is never simple. As centuries passed, Moscow rose while Kiev fell. Ukraine became a land fought over by empires: Poland, Austria, Hungary, the Ottomans, and later, the Russian Empire. But it was the Soviet Union that would bind Ukraine and Russia together, not as equals, but as a reluctant marriage. What if I told you that modern Ukraine's biggest push toward independence didn't begin in 1991 but in 1932? During Stalin's rule, a tragedy known as Holodomor struck Ukraine, a man-made famine that killed millions. Many Ukrainians saw it as a deliberate genocide, an attempt to crush their identity and independence. Meanwhile, Russia saw Ukraine as an inseparable part of its empire, a little Russia that was too valuable to lose. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared independence. But for Russian leaders, Ukraine's independence was never permanent. It was just a mistake that would someday be corrected. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Ukraine found itself caught in the middle of a new Cold War between Russia and the West. In 2014, Ukraine's pro-Russian president was overthrown in what Russia called a Western-backed coup and what Ukrainians called a revolution for democracy. The response? Russia seized Crimea, a region with a majority Russian-speaking population, claiming it was protecting its people. The West imposed sanctions, but Russia held its ground. Then came the real powder keg, Nord Stream 2, an $11 billion gas pipeline that would bypass Ukraine and give Russia full control over Europe's energy. If Nord Stream 2 became operational, Ukraine's pipelines would become useless, its economy would crumble, and Europe would depend entirely on Russian gas. Ukraine saw the danger, the US saw the danger, Russia saw an opportunity, and then war. Was this war truly about Ukraine, or about who controls Europe's future? In February 2022, Russia invaded. Putin called it a special military operation. The world called it an invasion. Moscow expected Ukraine to fall in days, but it never did. Kiev didn't collapse. Zelensky didn't flee. Ukraine fought back. But this wasn't just a war of tanks and missiles. This was a war of technology. Russia unleashed cyber attacks, crashing Ukraine's power grids. Ukraine fought back with AI-driven intelligence, tracking Russian troops in real time. Drones became the new soldiers, Turkish Bayraktar, TB2s versus Russian Lancet drones. And then came one of the biggest surprises of the war. Russia's military wasn't as powerful as the world thought. Western analysts had expected a Russian blitzkrieg. Instead, they saw tactical failures, poor logistics, and a war that dragged on far longer than expected. Meanwhile, Ukraine, fueled by Western weapons and sheer defiance, mounted one of the most unexpected resistances in modern history. But behind every battle is a human story. A survivor from Mariupol recalls, "We sheltered in a theater. We painted children on the roof so they wouldn't bomb us. They bombed us anyway." A Russian conscript confesses, "They told us we were liberating Ukraine, but we only liberated graves." Millions of Ukrainians fled their homes. Thousands of Russian soldiers never returned home. And amid the ruins, ordinary people became heroes. The farmer who towed away a Russian tank with his tractor, The grandmother who stood up to Russian soldiers, the volunteer hackers who turned laptops into weapons. Yet, despite the suffering, the war didn't just remain in Ukraine. It shook the entire world. From gas prices to global inflation, from Sweden and Finland joining NATO, to China watching Taiwan with growing interest, this war has reshaped the planet. Some even ask, is this the first AI-driven world war? With AI predicting battles, drones replacing soldiers, and cyber attacks replacing bombs, this war is changing warfare itself. Some warn it's just a preview of something even bigger to come. What if this war isn't just about Russia and Ukraine, but about a future where AI, not generals, decide who wins and who loses? How does this end? Does Ukraine rebuild stronger or become another frozen conflict like Korea? Does Russia accept defeat or does it escalate? And what about NATO, China, the future of war itself? One thing is certain, Ukraine has changed the world. But at what cost? This video used AI to recreate events. Support verified charities below. Subscribe for Part 2. Will China invade Taiwan? AI predictions uncovered.